So first, can you tell us a little about yourself?
Oh, okay. Well, I'm a composer performer. I compose works for my own solo voice and electronics that I perform in concerts that sometimes use video and sometimes not, but also almost always I use sort of gesture controlled MIDI instruments to manipulate the sound and play sampled sounds and sort of uh, control the parameters of the processing on my voice. Um, and so that body of work is probably the work that I'm best known for. But these days, I've been spending a substantial amount of my time also composing chamber works. For soloists, chamber ensembles, and occasionally a chamber orchestra or a chorus. And those usually involve some kind of electronics, although uh, more often than not, it's just a fixed media part that the group plays or sings along with. Um, and those fixed media parts often consist of um, layers of sampled speech sounds that I use to compose the music.
Great, thank you. And what is the initial inspiration behind your pieces? Can you share like some insights into your creative process, like particularly how you begin a new composition?
Um, it depends on what kind of a composition it is, because as I mentioned, I have quite a few different sort of bodies of work. There's the solo voice and electronics pieces, there are the chamber works, and there's also quite a bit of fixed media work that I make as scores for dance and sometimes film and video artists. And so depending on and also sound installation. Um, so depending on which thing I'm composing for, there's often a different approach. When I'm composing for my own solo voice and electronics, I usually use um, I usually use my setup, the same setup that I use when I'm performing. I usually set that up in my studio, and I actually do some live improvisation in my studio using the tools that I use for performance. And then from those improvisations, I often am able to sort of pull out actual completed pieces. So fortunately, I'm able to record as I play. And so if I'm playing and I come across something that I think, oh, I think this is good, I think this could be a piece, hopefully I'm recording, and then I can play that recording back and learn from it and figure out how to do what it is that I had just done. And then I sort of set it and it becomes a piece. So those pieces are not improvised works in the sense that I improvise them live in front of an audience, but they are born out of improvisation. Um, and whereas if I'm making a piece for a chamber ensemble or a chamber orchestra or something like that, then my technique tends to be well, one of the things I frequently do when I'm starting a piece is I conduct some interviews with people, and I record the interviews, and then I take fragments of the speech from the interviews, and I build text collages that become kind of an armature for the piece. And then I actually compose the music by pulling the transcribed pitches and rhythms from the speech sounds and uh, transcribing those for the instruments that will be playing the piece. And then I sort of sculpt the piece out of those fragments that become motifs, like musical motifs for the piece. Um, so that's one way I work. I also feel that a certain amount of improvisation is involved in composing those chamber works as well. Um, and I actually think that all composition is a form of improvisation, because as you're creating the work, you're making it up. And you may not do that in front of an audience, but you're still making it up as you go. And so when I'm writing, for example, for a string quartet or maybe for a Pierrot ensemble or something, I will start by putting all of the tracks in Pro Tools, MIDI tracks representing each instrument that's in the ensemble. And then I can actually play on my keyboard into the track, and it's captured as MIDI. But in that sense, I'm actually playing what it is that they are going to be playing, and so there is this element of improvisation in that moment where I'm creating these fragments by playing them. And then after they get into the MIDI tracks, I can hear them. I can actually immediately hear them on a facsimile of the instrument that's going to eventually be playing them. And so in that way, I can construct the piece and kind of hear timbrally what it's going to sound like as I go along.
Yeah, that sounds amazing. Are there any new directions or unexplored areas within music composition that you're particularly excited to go into in your future projects?
Huh. I don't know. I think I've been inspired by get all of the commissions I've had recently to write for all these different instruments that I never had written for before. And so maybe for me, the idea of having the inclusion of these new new colors that I can write for and include in my own music, um, maybe I have a little bit of excitement about that, like just you know, I mean, I feel like in a way I've been doing so many commissioned works recently that I've been putting my attention towards um, writing for other people. In other words, making music in service of somebody else's ensemble or their whatever it is that they're doing, and but it makes me have the desire to compose works for myself that were not commanded by somebody, but that make use of the broader range of colors that I've encountered when writing for ensembles.
In your opinion, what are the biggest challenges faced by contemporary composers and performers within the classical music industry today?
Hmm. Um, well, I don't know. I think the challenges are the same as they've always been. And it's just a matter of like having the time and the support to make the work and to get it out there. But I feel in a way that at least from where I'm standing, it looks like there are now more opportunities for composers to make new works and to explore new areas because um, that world, the classical music world, has is sort of attempting to open their doors up a little bit more and open up their ears a little bit more and be accepting of a broader range of things, welcoming of, newer approaches. And so I could be wrong about that, but at least maybe from where I'm standing, the way that I've sort of entered into this world, it looks like it's more open than it once was.
Are there any emerging trends or movements that you believe will impact the contemporary music genre positively?
Um, Well, one trend I think is it's sort of what I just mentioned is that
Hmm.
I feel like the classical music world is trying to catch up. They're trying to open up and broaden and attract newer blood and younger, um, more adventurous ideas. And so I feel like that trend is really helping a lot. And also the erasing of boundaries a little bit. Like I feel like uh, probably now more than ever, there's a much more liquid. movement between what used to be considered separate genres. Um, and people are combining, things stylistically and technically and, just in their approaches. Uh, it seems like it's opening up in that way. So I feel like that's a good opportunity for people.
Hmm. Other than the things you just mentioned, are there any other specific strategies or contemporary classical music can be made to be more accessible to a wider audience?
Um, well, maybe it, maybe it just has to do with labels because I mean I just this is just an analogy, but for example, my work has often, sort of straddled the boundaries of a lot of different genres and disciplines. And one of those areas is the area of sound art, which, historically has been seen separate from music, as it were. There are a lot of sound artists who don't want their work to be referred to as music. Um, and I think that what that comes from is that the most of the world, especially the non-professional, like the sort of layperson who's not a musician and not a sound artist or not an artist at all, most of those people have very, very strong preconceptions about what the word music means. And if they hear something and it doesn't meet the criteria of their definition of what music is supposed to do, then they think it's either bad or it's not music at all. Um, and, there was always the old trope of like people's parents saying, turn that off. That's not music, that's noise. Um, and it's, uh, and so what I find is that like by avoiding the use of the word music, sound artists have been able to put themselves in a category where they're not being judged against these very strict rules that people have made for themselves about what music is supposed to do. And so if you go and you listen to a piece of art and you were not told this is music, then you're listening with a more open ear as to what it might be, and maybe hearing it more broadly. So I think you could expand that to this notion of, um, whether something is classical music or not, because the term classical music has already, for a long time, been a very, confusing and dicey category, because for some people classical refers to a very specific period and only that period, and contemporary classical music to those people is not classical music. Um, but most people sort of have this box where there's classical music and then there's popular music. um, and I feel like when you sort of let go of those terms maybe a little bit and not worry about what music is, not worry about categorizing music, it then breaks down some of the barriers as to what's allowed and what's possible. So maybe that's a key, is to think about sort of letting go of some of the labels.
Yeah, definitely. What is your vision for the future of music composition with AI technology or any kind of technology? What are like the pros and cons?
Hmm. Um, well, everybody is asking me about this, and because it's the hot topic these days, AI, and I have to admit I'm not as interested as people want me to be. You know, um, I think sort of AI type models were more interesting to me when they were really janky and didn't work real well. And then it used to be fun to sort of experiment with them, like taking things like, um, the translators that are online that,
Mhm.
and feeding a text into a translator and then translating it back and forth from a language to another language, or
Yeah.
passing it through multiple languages. And then you end up with this incredible, like, word soup that is, it makes for interesting uh, libretto or something for something that you're working on. But now that it's gotten so slick and the lines between whether something was made or done by a human or done by a machine have gotten so blurry and difficult to detect for most humans. I guess I find it less interesting now.
Yeah, definitely. Are there any outreach programs or educational initiatives that you find particularly like promising in promoting contemporary music?
Oh, um, I guess I really turned my attention mostly to just making work, and I
Hmm.
have not, for better or worse, I haven't put a lot of my own energy into the notion of trying to make music accessible or trying to reach out to more people. I'm just trying to make work that I think is good work. And
Right.
then I hope that through whatever channels that it makes it to the ears of people who will find it interesting. I'm more interested in letting the work find its audience than trying to, strong arm an audience towards the work. So I don't have a lot of ideas about that, but I can say that I've encountered a couple different organizations in recent years that are doing wonderful work with, bringing this music to young people and also helping to get those young people uh, um, some exposure for the work that they're doing. Like,
Hmm.
I was invited to do something once for this organization called Next Fest, and I think they mostly focus on strings, but they do this sort of almost like a boot camp for young string players, and they always invite a composer to come and be like in residence, and then they learn that composer's work, and they play concerts. And I've also seen like a lot of the chamber ensembles and small music organizations are doing these creative labs now where they invite young composers or young players to come and uh, be sort of in camp with them for a while and work with mentoring composers. And so, Eighth Blackbird has one called the Eighth Blackbird Lab, and I think there's a couple of other chamber ensembles. Kronos Quartet is doing a lot of work with uh, trying to uh, promote people working with young people getting their music out there, and um, there's the Walden School, which is I'm not sure what the guardrails are around that in terms of who can attend that and how that exactly works, but there's a lot of really good uh, projects that people are doing. I'm happy to come and be a guest at those, and I have done a lot of that, but I'm not really an activist in the way of like trying on my own to start something like that or to um, come up with ideas for that sort of thing. I just appreciate that some people are doing that. For
Hmm.
me, I really feel like my reason for being is just to try to make work and to get it out there in whatever way, share it with people in whatever way I can.
Hmm. A lot of music students don't really know how to start or understand modern classical music. Do you have any tips for them?
Um, well, again, maybe it's just about letting go of labels and listening with a more open, just listening for interesting sound instead of trying to find, uh, um, trying to place something that they're hearing within the construct of some genre or style that's named, but rather just being open to new sounds and broadening their listening that way. I guess that would be my advice.
So, final question. Do you have any composers in mind that you think were underrepresented and should be remembered?
Hmm. Um, well, I didn't do my homework on this, so I don't have a prepared list for you. But I guess I will say that it it might be worthwhile for people to go back and look into, for example, there have been a lot of women who have composed some amazing music, and um, because of the times that they lived in, they were not recognized, and either their work was credited to someone else, or they just were subjected to, not being heard. And so maybe it's would be useful for people to do some research on their own and go back and find out who some of those people were and give their
Mhm.
work another listen. Um, but yeah, I am at a loss off the top of my head to give you specific names.
All right, all right. And that concludes our interview. Thank you so much for all the great responses. It was very
Okay.
nice meeting you.
It was
Yeah.
nice meeting you. I hope
Hmm.
this is helpful to you.
Yeah, yeah, it will,
And I
it
hope you can
definitely.
edit